special City Council study session for Tuesday, February 25th. Oh, I'm sorry. Were we on? Okay, I'll start over. Good afternoon. Welcome to our Costa Mesa City Council special study session for Tuesday, February 25th, 2020. I will now call the meeting to order. And would everyone please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Please say with me, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Madam Clerk, will you please have the roll?
The record reflect that all council is present except Councilmember Mansour and Mayor Pro Tem Stevens.
Okay, and Mayor Pro Tem Stevens will be a little bit late. He's in traffic. Okay, and then City Attorney, do you have a report? Or Mr. Preciosi, on behalf of the City Attorney?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The City Attorney's Office has one request, and that is a motion to hold a closed session pursuant to Government Code 54954.2, subsection B, subsection 2, on the basis that the need exists to take action immediately, and the need for action came to the attention of the agency after the agenda was posted. Pursuant to Government Code 54956.9 D1, for existing litigation, one case, City of Costa Mesa et al. Versus United States of America et al., U.S. District Court case number 8:20-CV-00368-JLS-JDE.
Council, is there a motion?
Move the item or move the recommendation.
Second.
Okay, call for the question.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, and I would note that the closed session is scheduled to be held at 6:30 p.m. this evening or immediately following the study session, whichever occurs later.
Okay, and at this time, we will have a staff presentation regarding the item of business that's on our agenda. And after the staff presentation, then we'll have public comments, and then we'll have questions and comments from the council. Ms. Green, can you read the title?
Thank you. It's discussion and potential City Council direction regarding 2021-2029 Housing Element Update. Presentation by Mr. Curtis, Economic and Development Services Director.
Mr. Curtis.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. This evening we're here to talk, this is the second study session we've done with the intent of updating the City Council on the status of the requirements related to the sixth cycle housing element process. That includes the RHNA process that we've discussed with the Council on numerous occasions. It's to also provide the City Council with updated information related to potential strategies to prepare a housing element and also to provide additional discussion along those lines. With me this evening, I have Principal Planner Manu Ashabi and Deputy City Attorney Scott Porter. The topics we'll be discussing this evening include an overview of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment process, or the RHNA process. We will talk about the latest draft RHNA allocations and the appeal process that will follow that before the RHNA becomes final. We will discuss an overview of the recent housing legislation that's been adopted by the state in the last, mainly in the last year, but a little bit beyond that. And then finally, we'll finish up with discussion of the actual sixth cycle housing element process and timeline, including strategies for providing adequate sites to meet the regional housing needs assessment, additional options to meet the RHNA allocations, such as accessory dwelling units and other policies, and wrap it up with another alternative that we would like to bring to the council, which is an inclusionary housing ordinance. Principal Planner Ashabi will cover the majority of the staff slides, with Scott providing the information on the legislation, and I will chime in a few times during the presentation.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. I will start with an overview of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. For each housing element planning period, the State Department of Housing and Community Development determines the housing needs of the entire SCAG region, which includes 191 jurisdictions. The SCAG is responsible for developing a methodology to determine each jurisdiction's RHNA allocation. To develop the methodology, SCAG must survey all jurisdictions on their planning factor. There are two legislation that SCAG needs to follow. One is AB 2158 and AB 1771. And the factors that should be included are job, housing, relationship, infrastructure, and limitation outside the jurisdiction control, county policies to preserve agriculture or open space, and high housing costs. This slide shows the timeline for the RHNA appeal period and also where we are in the RHNA process. As recently as yesterday, February 24th, the SCAG RHNA subcommittee approved the final RHNA methodology and the appeal guidelines. The next meeting would be held on March 5th. That's the Economic and Human Development Committee that will consider the RHNA numbers, and the Regional Council is scheduled to take action on April 2nd. After the RHNA is distributed, there's a 45-day appeal period starting mid-April through end of May, and the appeal hearings are anticipated to be sometime in the summer. So the final allocation is expected to be distributed in August, and the housing elements from the jurisdictions are due to the State Department of Housing and Community Development in October of 2021. So this far, and based on the August 22nd, 2019 numbers that have been modified slightly as a result of the merging the regional transportation plan and the sustainable community strategies. There's been a slight change, but again, the overall numbers stays as at 1.34 million, and this is the distribution of the income category. As far as the appeal reallocation, the cities as well as HCD can appeal their RHNA number as well as another jurisdiction's RHNA number. And if the appeals are successful, the numbers will be reallocated back to the region. If reallocation is fewer than 7%, which is 93,928 for this RHNA cycle, units would be reallocated back proportionally to all jurisdictions. If the reallocation is more than the 7% number, SCAG will apply a methodology similar to the final methodology and redistribute the delta or the greater amount over the 7%.
And we will touch on this again at the end of the presentation, but this item, whether or not the city council has interest in the city pursuing an appeal, will be one of the items we're asking the city council to give us some direction on this evening.
So as far as housing element requirement, the housing element is a required element of the city's general plan that needs to be updated every 8 years. The housing element includes the current status of the housing projected housing needs in terms of income and special needs population, and potential location and policies to meet local and regional housing needs. The city is required to submit an annual report to the State Department of Housing and Community Development on housing development and the progress toward meeting RHNA. This slide shows a snapshot of the HCD, their way of keeping track of which cities are in compliance. And as it is, the city is in compliance. We do have a certified housing element that is through 2021. We are responsible to report an annual housing progress by April of each year. And the state inventory of approved housing and housing progress is basically kept track with HCD. As far as the guide for the housing element, it is noted in the government code that requires local governments to prepare an inventory of land that's suitable for residential development, including vacant sites and sites that have potential for redevelopment. It also needs to have an analysis of the relationship of the zoning and public facilities and services to these sites. Just for some data background, the city has a total of 3,788 acres that are dedicated to residential uses. That's about 47% of this area of the city. This shows a breakdown of how it's divided by zoning, low density being 25.9%, medium density 10.7%, and high density 10.5%. As of 2010 census, the city's renter occupied was 58%. That number may have increased within this next cycle, and that has been consistent throughout the county. As far as local challenges, the city would need to identify suitable and available sites for affordable housing zoned at a minimum of 30 dwelling per acre. This is a density that's been identified by HCD as to qualify as affordable. New housing legislation also links the state fund to a compliant housing element, and non-compliance could lead to the loss of funding and/or fines. There's also the challenge with Measure Y and some restriction on adding density.
Manu, if I could interrupt for 1 sec. Specifically related to the first bullet, looking at identifying sites zoned at a minimum of 30 units per acre. We'll talk about it a little bit more in the presentation, but that appears, based on our existing draft RHNA of 11,700 plus units, it appears it's going to be a challenge that's going to require rezoning or upzoning of a fair amount of land in the city. We believe that Measure Y is going to pose some significant challenges in meeting those requirements to get a housing element certified. So I just want to make sure that these are kind of in context of the fact that we think Measure Y really addresses or impacts the ability to get sufficient sites for the housing to meet the RHNA.
I also had the graphics that shows the timeline for RHNA, and the city is subject to this aggressive timeline. As far as upzoning, we do have some overlays that allow for higher densities. There's also areas in the North Costa Mesa that allows for higher densities. These slides show some of the areas that are currently available to be considered for upzoning opportunities. Those would be the urban plan areas and the residential overlay, as well as the harbor mixed-use overlay. There are also areas north of the 405 and the airport that could be considered for upzoning. The staff report had a comprehensive table as to what has been entitled throughout the city and what is basically planned for the build-out with the 2035 general plan. Those sites include vacant and underutilized sites that add up to about 660 units. The Fairview Developmental Center has an allocation of about 582 units. Specific plans such as North Costa Mesa and Newport Boulevard also have allocations of 535 and 159 units. The Sobeka overlay allows 40 dwelling per acre and a maximum of 500 units. 388 of those units are still remaining. The West Side urban plans also allow up to 1,671 units, and as of date, 1,080 units have been entitled or constructed. The residential incentive overlay was modified to 4 nodes, and within those 4 nodes, 273 units could be built, and that does not include the Costa Mesa Motor Inn site. Harbor mixed use could allow up to 491 units. So with adding all this is about 3,500 units that was basically planned with the general plan build out. As far as potential site options, one option would be to consider urban plan overlays and increasing the maximum density of those areas from 20 to 30 dwelling per acre. The other option would be the residential incentive overlay, maybe expanding on some of the areas and allowing the same as density that's currently allowed, that's 40 dwelling per acre. Increasing the number of residential units in the Fairview Developmental Center. Also considering Newport Boulevard specific plan, the density currently is at 17.4, and the potential would be to go up to 30 dwelling per acre to qualify for affordable. The proposal for One Metro West also has some potential for affordable units. And then there's also other options to consider for upzoning north of the 405 and or the airport industrial areas.
Thank you, Manu. Other policy options that we felt appropriate to discuss this evening. Scott will be talking later about some recent legislation. I know the council's aware of it. We took action back in January regarding accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. The answers that we're getting from the state at this point in time, as far as how those may or may not be able to be used to meet some of our necessary sites for affordable housing, or not for affordable, but for housing under the housing element. The state has taken a fairly conservative approach towards counting these towards housing elements in the past. They've looked backward in time to see how many units have been approved in a city over a given period of time. We expect that HCD will continue to take that approach. What we're hoping for, and we haven't gotten word on this yet, is that based on the much more liberal ADU laws that have been approved in the state over the last year, which allow in Costa Mesa accessory dwelling units on virtually every residential property, with the potential for, and junior accessory dwelling units as well on the vast majority of residential properties in the city. We're hoping that the state will look at the fact that that's going to increase the numbers beyond what has been done historically and allow for a much larger number of accessory dwelling units to potentially be counted towards our needs. As far as affordability goes, that's a little more tricky with the accessory dwelling units, as it requires either showing that the rents are falling in those rates or a covenant from the owner, which most owners are unwilling to do. Another option we see, and I'll talk in a second about inclusionary housing, but we believe there's opportunities within the density bonus to incentivize additional affordable housing above what may otherwise be required by the city. Essentially, an inclusionary housing ordinance is going to be limited as to setting up a minimum amount of affordable housing that needs to be provided. Typically, in market rate housing, those numbers are somewhere between 10 and 15% affordable. But we believe using the density bonus, there's opportunities to incentivize developers to provide even additional affordable housing above that. And specifically, the way that would work is for every additional percentage of affordable housing, or for each unit, the density bonus that's required by the state is 35%. The city could allow density bonuses above 35%. So for each additional percentage of affordable housing, you may get 10% more of density bonus. Or in developing these, if it's the desire of the council, we move forward with the housing element. We will do a full market analysis and economic analysis to determine what the appropriate incentive would be to get people to provide additional affordable housing. And then the last option, I've talked a little bit about inclusionary housing, but if you could switch to the next page, Minu. Staff, in order to meet the RHNA that's before the city with approximately 4,700 low and very low income units, staff at this point believes it's appropriate for the city to consider, and we're recommending that the city council does direct staff to move forward with preparing an inclusionary housing ordinance. Staff will do further analysis as we move forward, but for the present time, what staff is recommending is a affordable percentage of 15% split between very low and low income levels. We also recommend that there be an allowance of an in lieu fee instead of providing affordable housing, because it's not appropriate or possible to provide affordable housing with every type of development. Some developments are just too small to absorb affordable units. I put a number here of 40. It wasn't tied to anything. It was actually a number smaller than we arrived at in Irvine. And given the fact that most of the projects in Costa Mesa are smaller than we were dealing with there, we came with a smaller number. But that number can be whatever the City Council and Planning Commission, as we move forward, feels is appropriate. That was a placeholder. The thought being that at some level, projects are small enough that they can pay an in lieu fee instead of providing affordable housing on site. Larger projects have to do the affordable on site. And then if we went that route, we would be developing an in lieu fee that with the intent of actually creating the exact same number of units that would otherwise be required were they providing them on site.
So I've been asked to give an overview of the myriad changes to the law that have become effective on January 1st, 2020. There are a number of housing bills. The first set of housing bills that I'll talk about relate to accessory dwelling units. Now, the city already has an accessory dwelling unit or urgency ordinance that that was effective at the end of the year, so that we were sure that we were up to date. Could I get the next slide? So here's the quick overview. Governor Newsom signed 18 housing bills October 9th. 5 of them are relating to accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. SB 330 is the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. It streamlines the approval processes for affordable housing projects. And then already in 2019 was the Omnibus Housing Bill, AB 957 and AB 1197. There are a number of other ones, but these are probably the most important. So let's talk about ADUs and junior ADUs, JADUs. So here are the rules as mandated by the state. First of all, it's important to understand the difference between an ADU and a JADU. A JADU is it's a fairly new concept. The idea is the proverbial grandma lives in the same single-family dwelling with the family. That is a JADU. So it doesn't have to be grandma. They don't have to be related. That's just the prototypical example of who might live in a JADU. This site, we are only required to allow them in single-family dwellings, not multifamily. Additionally, the owner must live on site. So if either needs to live in the JADU or in the single-family dwelling. So this is why I'm saying it's grandma. It's basically a member of the family, more or less, because the owner is going to live there, and they're not renting it out to some third party. The JADU can be up to 500 square feet and no more. That's what we're mandated to allow. Additionally, they're allowed to have shared bathroom facilities. If you're not really a member of the same family, are you sure you want to share a bathroom with this person? Again, it's not required that you're a member of the family, but that's sort of the underlying thought process. So that is what a JADU is, and an ADU has been around for a longer period of time. This is your prototypical second unit. It can be in the garage, it can be in the backyard. What's interesting, and we'll get to this more in a minute, well, and actually you can see here one of the bullet points, is number one, ADUs are allowed in all residential zones, including multifamily zones. This is new. Second of all, multifamily units may have, we must allow them in multifamily. We are not mandated by the state to allow JADUs on multifamily properties. So now the city is prescribed in its ability to pick zones in the city where we say, you know what, no ADUs are allowed in that area of town. The only 3 reasons we can do this: water adequacy, sewer adequacy, or public safety. Your prototypical example is really narrow, windy streets and the fire truck can't get through. Well, we're pretty flat. There's not a lot of that prototypical example. Certainly there may be other situations, but that's the prototypical example. So, and we've talked about JADUs, they're allowed in single-family dwellings. And I should say, we can always do more than what's mandated by the state. We can always allow more housing. This is the minimum of what we must allow. Next slide. So the lot configurations for ADUs, we can no longer have a minimum lot size requirement. We used to be able to say, hey, if you don't have at least, say, 7,000 square feet of a lot, then you can't have an ADU, no more. Setbacks, generally, we need to allow them if they are at least 4 feet from side and rear yards. In some, if you have got an existing structure, such as a garage, and it's within 4 feet of the side or rear yards, then we must allow them to convert that existing structure regardless of the setback. Yes, it still needs to meet fire and life safety requirements, but basically you can just build the wall safe enough that it's no longer a fire hazard. So that's the last point. If you're converting existing structures, such as your pool house or your garage, then you don't need to meet the new standards. Okay. So the ADU size regulations, we are required to allow ADUs to be as small as 220 square feet. That's essentially half the size of a garage. That's the, if they build it at least that size, they can build as small as that. If we want to, we are allowed to allow them to build it even smaller. We can allow them to be as small as 150 square feet, although most jurisdictions do not allow that to occur. Most jurisdictions stay with the minimum standards of state law, which is 220. The maximum, in other words, we must allow them to be at least this high. It's extremely complicated, but the short version is roughly 850 square feet to 1,200 square feet. There's lots of nuances. I don't want to bore you to death. If you have specific questions, I would be happy to bore you to death. But the most important thing is no matter what our zoning rules are, we must always allow an 800 square foot ADU that's at least 16 feet tall, provided that it completes, I should say, that is no higher than 16 feet tall and meets the minimum setback requirements of 4 feet and from the side and rear yards. And then JADUs, we've talked about them. We must allow them to be up to at least 500 square feet. We cannot require parking if they do a garage conversion. They want to change that garage into an ADU, we must allow it. We cannot require replacement parking for that garage. So now the house itself doesn't have parking, and the ADU itself. We can require parking for the ADU. I say that in theory, and I'm half smirking because about 80% of the time we can't even require parking for the ADU. So you're going to have an ADU and the single family house with possibly no mandated parking. Usually they'll end up still being able to park on the existing driveway, but we can't mandate that. There are exceptions. One of the exceptions is, I laugh because one of the exceptions is that if the ADU is within half a mile of public transit, then we can't require parking for that ADU. There are other exceptions, but that's the most important one. We are limited in our ability to collect impact fees for ADUs. If they're smaller than 750 square feet, we cannot require any impact fees. If they're 750 square feet or more, then the amount of the impact fee, and actually that's not entirely accurate, is that that slide is incorrect. What it should say is that we are allowed to charge pro rata compared to the size of the existing residence. So if you've got a 2,000 square foot residence and they're proposing a 1,000 square foot ADU, 1,000 is 50% of 2,000, so therefore they have to pay 50% of the fee. We can still charge our processing fees, but I was talking about development impact fees. So you need to pay for whatever long-term development needs the city has. Existing family structures, now we must allow ADUs, but not JADUs. Within existing multifamily structures, we must allow 2 detached ADUs to be built. You've got an existing apartment building, they want to build 2 ADUs in the back, we have to allow it. As long as they meet the 816-foot, 4-foot rule. Additionally, they can convert existing non-habitable space within the existing, say, apartment building to residential space. So if you've got the broom closet within the apartment building, they can change the broom closet into an ADU provided that it still meets building standards. So that means it needs to meet that 220 square foot minimum. It needs to meet all these other requirements, but we must allow at least 1 on site. Conditions, we're limited in our ability to require conditions. We cannot require the ADU, if they have an ADU, we cannot require the owner to live on site. But if it's a JADU, we must require the owner to live on site. I love, see, it's complicated. And then also, these are not for short-term rentals. So we have to prohibit ADUs for short-term rentals. If there is a portion of Costa Mesa single-family private residential development, homeowners association has rules that says you are not allowed to have an ADU. The state says, no, actually that is void. That you cannot have unreasonable restrictions on ADUs or JADUs. That doesn't directly affect us, the city, because those are not our rules, but it voids the private property rights of existing ownership agreements. AB 671 and AB 139, these relate to housing elements. So the housing element is required to include a plan to incentivize and promote ADUs in the housing elements. Here are some possible examples of incentives: low-cost loans, Section 8 voucher subsidies, pre-approved ADU designs that come with a streamlined cost and timeline. If you build it just like this, we'll approve it really fast. We've done your designing for you, just build the darn thing. By the end of 2020, HCD is charged to have a list of all available housing grants, and there is some discussion about some of that being to support ADUs. I don't know, I can find out the status of that. AB 101, transitional housing. This was effective July 31st, 2019. Now it says that there's increased housing element enforcement. So if a city fails to have a compliant housing element, then it is more likely that you will be staring down the gun of the Attorney General. The Attorney General is required to request an order mandating requests for a writ of mandate, potential mandatory fines for non-compliance with the court order. The AG must offer 2 meetings with the city. For the 2021 housing element cycle, Department of Finance must have a list of cities not in compliance. And that's the stick, and the carrot is that cities are awarded additional points in the scoring program for housing infrastructure programs pursuant to guidelines adopted by HCD. If you have a compliant housing element, then you are more likely to obtain grants. Also, AB 101 relating to low barrier navigation centers. Cities cannot have a discretionary permit process relating to low barrier navigation centers. Essentially, this is to fight homelessness. The density bonus, it expands the density bonus for projects which qualify for the density bonus by meeting the 2/3 residential requirement. Essentially, if it's a project to support housing for folks that are homeless, then it increases the bonuses that are available. SB 5, grant funding. Essentially, there are many additional sources of potential revenue that cities can obtain relating to grants. Here's one example, is that you've got $250 million that the state is giving out for high-density infill, coastal engagement effort, community engagement efforts, et cetera. SB 330 added, they expanded the definition of housing development. So essentially what this means is if you have a project which is for housing for low-income individuals, then it expands what is meant by that, and it creates a high-speed process that a city must follow, and we're limited in our ability to deny such projects. So now there's a preliminary application process. The application is complete if they provide specified information. So if they provide the city with this information, then essentially it locks in whatever rules are at the time, because then otherwise the city says, oh no, we don't want that project, let's change the rules. And the state says, no, you can't do that anymore. So public agencies must create a checklist specifying what is required for a complete application. This needs to be on the city's website. The developer has 180 days from submittal to submit a development application, and the city can only request those things that are identified on the application checklist. In other words, streamlining the approval process for these types of projects. A city cannot have more than 5 meetings on a project, and we cannot require rezoning if it meets the general plan standards. Additionally, there's only 90 days there's a stream. Previously, you had 120 days post-approval of an EIR. Now you have only 90 days. For low-income projects seeking tax credits, the time frame is actually now 60 days. SB 330 continues essentially saying that you cannot have a net loss of housing availability. So if you're going to be downzoning housing, you need to be upzoning housing. Well, we've got a housing element where we're going to have to be upzoning. This is completely consistent with that. City cannot have a housing moratorium. You can't have a moratorium on housing, including mixed-use development, except for imminent threats to public health and safety. Next slide. AB 957, the Omnibus Housing Bill. This talks about changes. It requires a city-controlled sites within the housing inventory to be listed in the housing element, technical changes, receiverships. It makes it easier for receiverships to, it changes the noticing requirements. The density bonus law. So historically, the density bonus law for a number of years has essentially said if a city is looking at a proposed project for a project where they will be providing some sort of affordable housing, either very low housing, then the city must give either a density bonus, in other words, you can put more units on that site, and or you need to give concessions or incentives, such as we'll allow you to build it just a little bit higher. You can build it a little bit wider. You can encroach into our setbacks. Maybe you have to have less parking. All of these sorts of concessions or incentives. So now, in addition to the historical state mandated concessions and incentives, AB 1763 says if a project is 100% affordable, not only do you have to give the regular incentives, but instead it's actually 4. Often it would only be 3. You can also give a bonus for moderate housing. Additionally, there are more situations where the density bonus is required. For example, you've got an 80% density bonus if it's within half a mile of a major transit stop. That there's no density limits if it's within half a mile of a transit stop. And then 20% of the units have to be affordable under the rules. Basically, they're expanding, they're increasing density, and a city is required to allow increased density for these types of projects that are 100% affordable.
We envision a series of workshops like tonight as we move through the next 2 years of developing and adopting a housing element update. To that effect, staff will be releasing an RFP, hopefully by the end of this week, otherwise beginning of next week, for a housing element consultant that would be working with staff and the city council and city to develop the housing element update. We would envision our next workshop sometime in the summer after the RHNA appeal process and after the housing consultant is on board. For this evening, staff is requesting that the city council provide some direction to staff regarding the housing element update process. And the things that we're seeking some direction from have to do with whether or not the city staff should move forward preparing an appeal to the city's RHNA allocation at the time that appeals are allowed. The second issue is whether or not staff should move forward with starting the process to develop an inclusionary housing ordinance. And the last item is more for some thoughts and suggestions at this point as we start to consider how we're going to address the RHNA in our housing element, and that is what the council might feel are some preferred approaches for how we might meet that RHNA as far as areas maybe that might be most appropriate for us to look at upzonings and rezonings and things of that nature that were discussed tonight. And that concludes our prepared remarks. We're happy to answer questions that you may have at this time.
Okay, at this time, I think I'm going to hear from the public first, and then we'll take council comments after that and questions, just so that way we'll have the benefit of the public comments and questions first. Okay, so if you would like to speak to this item for our study session, we will have 2 minutes for each speaker. I understand there might be a presentation, is that right? And so that, are they being, we have a presentation? How much time do we need for the presentation? 3 minutes, perfect, okay. So why don't you go first, and we'll set the timer for 2 minutes after you've concluded. We like 3-minute presentations. Okay,
When does the clock start?
it starts as soon as you start talking.
Oh, no.
How do we change the slides?
Okay, let's get you all set up. Ms. Green is going to help you. So if you could give us your name and your group, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, so my name's Keith Page. This is Josh Copeland. And we are from the Kind Guys Development. And it's really a pleasure to be here. We're entrepreneurs, humanitarians. Josh's background is in general contracting, and mine is in nonprofit. Hard to believe, 1985, I was a freshman moving on to SCC's campus. Never would have thought I'd be here years later talking about this. And Josh was only 10, so that's thank you also for letting us be here. We're here tonight because we see co-living emerging as a viable option to help address the affordable housing need in our city. We'd love to become a strategic partner with the city in creating co-living environments that do two things. One, provide alternative, low-cost housing options, and two, build a sense of belonging and community with each one of our residents. Our projects are 100% affordable. We want to build 100% affordable co-living communities by repurposing vacant big box retail stores as well as available commercial and industrial spaces. We're learning a lot about co-living ourselves, and we're sure you are as well. One is it's growing in popularity. It's already international, and it's also here in the U.S., in New York, San Francisco, L.A., Chicago, San Jose, among others. It's the fastest growing disruptive segment in the national rental real estate market. It's gaining a lot of attention. The group We Work are now doing We Live. It's being referred to as hip, stylish, modern-day dorms for adults. Some of you could care less, but maybe for the right adult, it could be perfect. It creatively, and here's what I love, it creatively addresses problems like excessive living expenses, loneliness, boredom, depression, and low productivity by creating community and support. It also offers more flexible leases and often requires no down payments and no large move-in expenses. And oftentimes you pay one fee, and that would include internet, utilities, and everything. So it's really almost like turnkey. Our target, millennials and Gen Zs, ages 20 to 39. A lot of young professionals, those just out of college, paid interns, freelancers, and artists. All you got to do is go to Moongoat Coffee, and a bunch of them are there every day. Secondarily, we are finding a great need that this is a fit for young professionals, entrepreneurs, couples, those who want to travel, lock the door behind them, as well as those who are simplifying their lives. Is that the 2 minutes?
No, you got 30 seconds.
Okay. We have a lot to add, but Josh, I'm going to let you just give our request.
Okay.
Well, if you just finish your presentation.
Okay,
it's fine.
thank you.
I didn't think you were going to get it through at the pace you were going. Your pace was too slow.
My speech writers just gave us too much content.
Okay.
Our goal, here's why we love the Kind community as a partner with Costa Mesa, besides that it's our city. One is that our goal is that every unit would meet the HUD definition of affordable housing. You all know what that is. We'll save time and money by repurposing existing buildings. 3, we will design the space to be aesthetically pleasing, and there'll be pride of residency for everyone who calls it home. We will create a fantastic app that will streamline technology. We're going to utilize the best vetting processes out there to make sure that it's a safe starting point for each resident. And we'll hire and train the very best of staff that will embody kindness. And then lastly, I just love what I've done as a nonprofit, as a kind of a community activist for that. And we want to make sure that within our community, of kindness, that there's opportunities for people to actually experience and socialize, grow and learn, and also get out and be involved in the kind community, but also volunteer in our community.
Great. And did you have a specific request?
Yeah, we have a couple. One, this is really exciting, just listening to the needs and that we're able to be here with this plan. So our first is just to ask for continued conversation with the city, and that they would be, you guys would be open to continuing this conversation with us. And then also, if there are viable buildings or locations that you guys, it looks like you guys are already identifying areas that are potential places that we could be in. And then also there's a project in Costa Mesa on Placentia Avenue that we're ready to, in about a month, submit to the planning department for 10 or 12 residents in a commercial space. And we would love some help with that to have the planning department look at that. And then there's also San Jose passed a co-living code ordinance last year. A year ago tomorrow, actually, February 26th. And basically, they're stating that co-living would be 100 square foot residence, and that we would just hope that Costa Mesa could look at that ordinance and potentially move to adopt it or work on it with us.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Thanks so much for coming out tonight and presenting. Okay. Okay, if there are other speakers who would like to speak to this item, please come to the podium. We want to hear from you. I know some of you have been longing for this discussion for what, 20 years?
Yes. And we finally have a willing audience. Kathy Esfahani with the Costa Mesa Affordable Housing Coalition. I just want to say real briefly that we are very excited at the staff proposal for an inclusionary housing ordinance. It is the only way Costa Mesa might possibly meet the high RHNA number that's being assigned to us. Even if we had a lower RHNA number, it's the only way to get affordable housing built for the population that is in most desperate need, and that's people who are of low income and very low income, and even extremely low income. So I encourage the council to adopt the proposal and to really make affordable housing for the very low income population finally a reality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Mr.
evening,
Humphrey.
Council. Jay Humphrey, Costa Mesa resident. As you know, the world is aging and the baby boomers are taking over. And in the next 10 years, senior conversion to people converting to being over 65 will account for 75% of the actual growth in population that we're having as that demographic changes. So a lot of people who were on working formats with income will now go to a very fixed income and be needing affordable housing. One of the areas that I am very concerned about is mobile homes within Costa Mesa. An awful lot of those actually meet the criteria for affordable housing, and we have a number of overlay zones that are going to affect those. And if we, in fact, change the densities on those, that's going to affect them even more. And this will keep on happening. And the only thing I'd ask you to do is make sure that any loss of affordable housing to a project is replaced on a one-to-one basis with affordable housing from that project. So if a project puts 40 units on a place that previously had 20 units on it, and they were all affordable, they have to have a minimum of that 20, and they have to be maintained within the affordable, no matter what the rule said. So if the rule says you can have a 35%, you have to have a 50%. You have to have whatever's there. You cannot minimize it, and you cannot reduce it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, good evening. My name is Christine Nolf, and I'm part of the Affordable Housing Coalition as well, and really just here to cheer on this, not just conversation, but action that hopefully we'll be taking in the next couple of years. I actually went to elementary school with Josh Copeland, so it's fun to be here in this space talking about how do we continue to invest in our city that we both grew up in, that we love, and how can we be creative about how we're providing affordable housing. And so, yeah, I just want to cheer on the inclusionary housing. I would just encourage you, as Kathy did, to particularly not just look at like what's the very least we can do, but how do we really make it available to people who have been a part of our community and invested a lot and work hard here. Like that would be very, very low income, extremely low income. So that would be just my encouragement to the council. And yeah, even as Jay's talking, I'm thinking, okay, how can I be a part of connecting young people who are looking for affordable housing to seniors who have 3,000 square foot homes, who don't have community? You know, I would love to be a part of connecting those and providing rental income for them and community. So I think there's a lot of creative things that we can do as we move forward together.
Thank you.
Good evening, Cynthia McDonald. I'm one of these people that's been coming up here asking for an inclusionary housing ordinance for a long time, so it's great to see that happening. But I am going to have to ask the other question that I've been asking, and that is, where is the vision? We need a vision that looks at our entire city so that we can come at this from a creative point of view, but also, you know, satisfy the needs of, obviously, the state, but the residents, too. Changing the Newport Boulevard specific plan to increase density. We can't just cherry pick lots. It's spot zoning. It's what it brought about, Measure Y, in the first place. And so we need to really look at the vision for the city before we do any more planning. Thank you.
I would love to have a vision. If people would stop throwing these crazy crises at us, we might be able to do the work of our community. Sorry, it's just as I was sitting here listening. Okay, anyone else wishing to speak to this item? Seeing no more public comments, council members, if you would put your names in the queue. I just have a couple of, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry, request mic. Okay, there we go. Just a couple questions are, you know, Councilmember Guinness, it's fine. All you have to do is ask and we will put your name on the list. It was just a technological error. I apologize. It's not on purpose. Well, this is new technology. Ms. Green, have we been talking about this and how it's kind of cumbersome, and I've been trying my best to understand how to properly use the technology. So I'm very, very sorry. I'm not a robot. So anyway, back to the topic at hand. I would like to offer a couple of questions first, and then I'm going to call on the council members. I usually go last, but I'm going first this time. So we talked about the ADUs, and I know that there are some other communities that have templates for ADUs so that the city staff could have a template. Somebody could come in, they could pick one of the options of the template based on, our community is pretty much established in terms of the residential neighborhoods. We kind of know they're like model homes for the most part. And then is there a way that we could then also offer a incentive to agree to the covenant for it to remain affordable, which you said that that homeowners will not want to agree to, but if we allowed the ADU permitting process to be waived for the picking one of the templates so that we know that it would fit in a particular neighborhood properly, that we could waive, is that something that we could do?
Madam Mayor, to your first question, we've actually already had a couple meetings with companies who have thought of that same opportunity, is to develop a standardized ADU that could just be dropped in. The buildings department staff and I have met with them. I think we're looking at it favorably, and we're going to be working with them as they want to come forward, as long as anyone else that might be interested in that as well. So yes to that. As far as incentivizing, one of the things we're going to be doing as we prepare the housing element update is looking at means to incentivize what we want. And absolutely, we can look at ways to try to incentivize, because we would love for for accessory dwelling units to qualify in certain circumstances as affordable housing. And we'll be absolutely looking at ways to try to incentivize that.
And then that would be a way also for us to control what we somewhat can't control, because if we incentivize through the waiver process, then people will build them the way we want them to, right?
Presumably, yes.
You know, in most cases. Okay, great. And then is there a way, because I'm thinking about as we look at these plans and, you know, the increased density results in increased cars, results in increased incapacity on the streets for cars. Is there a way, and I know they do this in some communities, to actually prohibit parking on the street? So you de-incentivize people from having cars in certain areas.
So there, you may recall that I was laughing with myself, and probably only myself, about the fact that we have the ability, in theory, to mandate parking for the accessory dwelling unit. One of the exceptions, the most common exception, is that if it's within half a mile of mass transit, we cannot require parking. Additionally, one of the five exceptions is that if we require parking on the street, and like but we give out permits and we don't allow them to get a permit, we can't require a parking space.
No, you're hearing the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm asking, can we prohibit parking so that the street is clear? There's no parking, so that if there's no parking allowed on a particular area, that we're increasing the density, then no cars can be allowed there.
Establish no parking zones, you know, paint curbs red wherever. That's within the Public Works Department.
I don't know if that's a good idea or not. I'm just trying to think outside the box, and I know that some communities that I've been kind of researching, they actually don't allow parking, so something to think about. And let's see, on the co-living, great presentation, interesting concept. Love to hear more about how that works, and can we get copies of some other ordinances in other communities and build that in? And would that qualify for meeting our RHNA numbers?
Madam Mayor, we'll be happy to look into that. It's certainly a topic that we've been hearing about for the last several months with other cities. Historically, dormitory-type uses don't count towards the RHNA, but it's a new kind of an evolving type of housing in this area. So we will be discussing it with HCD staff because it seems like it's something that should count.
Okay, so let's not call it dormitory, no.
But that, you know what I'm saying, is
Yeah. Okay, and then as part of this plan, I agree with Mr. Humphrey, we need to protect the mobile home residents because many of them cannot move anywhere else. There is no place for them to move given the rents. And so as part of our housing element, as part of all of these plans that we have coming forward, I hope that we can put something together that protects the mobile home residents. As to the CCRs and those homeowner associations that are covered by CCRs, how are those homeowner associations getting notified about these new laws?
I do not know. Hopefully, I would imagine that a number of these associations are members of communities and they speak with other people, and a number of these communities have their own support networks of other individuals, but certainly venues like this gets the word out, and my guess is that their attorneys know, that their professional staff will know, but I don't know of the official manner in which this is the notification happens.
I think we have a list of all the homeowners associations in the city. Is there a way that we could put a letter together that would go out to them so that we could solicit their input with regard to this discussion we're having about a template for ADUs, so that we can, so that it's not just like some big surprise if somebody comes to us and asks for it?
yes, we can.
Okay. And, Oh, as it relates to the, I wrote down the initials and I can't remember what it stands for right now. VBRO, what are those called again?
Oh,
Short-term
rentals,
rentals,
yeah.
thank you. As it relates to the short-term rental discussion, is there a way for us to create a short-term rental ordinance that would address some of the issues that you're raising with respect to the new laws as it relates to ADUs and JDUs?
So cities, it's quite common for cities to regulate short-term rentals and to either expressly allow them or to disallow them or to allow them with regulations. The city certainly could do that.
Okay. Okay, those are all the questions I had. Thank you very much for the excellent staff report and presentation. It's a lot to consider. Councilmember Guinness, you're up.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions. I also had a question as to whether the co-housing would count towards our housing allocation. But first off, I have a question about the numbers. In our adopted general plan, it shows 9,271 additional units that could be created under the general plan over those that existed in 2016, at the time it was adopted. Since that time, we have pulled back significantly on our residential incentive overlays, which would have been an additional, which would have taken about 1,200 units out of there. So we're looking at, say, 8,000 units. But this table here is showing only 3,500 units, and I really doubt that we've built 4,500 units in the interim. So what accounts for the huge discrepancy in the numbers? As it's a magnitude of double.
Councilmember Guinness, these numbers are very conservative. They're basically based on some assumptions in the EIRs for the urban plan overlays. They're very conservative. And same thing for the Newport Boulevard specific plan. We applied very conservative numbers. So it's about 13 to 14% redevelopment.
So can we double check these numbers? Because clearly the general plan was grossly different than these numbers in some of the assumptions. And since we are talking about an increase in housing that really will transform our community entirely, they're asking us to build 11,700 units in the course of 7 years when it's taken us, 100 years to get to 43,000. So we're looking at a 27% increase in 7 years, and I don't think we could even get there from here. But even if we could, let's make sure that our numbers are the right numbers, because it just doesn't make sense in light of the information provided in the general plan. And then also in this where you have the 35, is that units that are entitled but not built? And how are we defining entitled? Does that mean they've pulled a permit? Does that mean that we just approved a specific plan or a plan development approval? How are we defining entitled?
Entitled is defined by units that are in a development agreement or included in the specific site, such as the Sakioka site.
And then the 3508, does that include entitled or non? What does that include out of the above?
It does not include entitled. The
So it
entitled
includes. So it doesn't include all units that are remaining to be built.
Correct.
And why is that?
Again, this is a very conservative approach to what can be accomplished within the next 8 years. That's why we took that conservative approach. The entitled units only apply to certain areas. The rest of them are, the total number is the one that are remaining.
That in addition to those entitled,
Correct.
could we get the number that are entitled as a total too? Because I would think that a conservative approach would include those that are entitled in as much as they actually are sort of on their way. Now, they might be built before the actual housing element period starts. So that would kind of leave us in the lurch. But I do think it would be helpful to have the total entitlement, because these numbers just do not make sense in light of what we were presented in the general plan and what we're consistently provided in the general plan. So this 3,500 unit, it's less than half what we would show based on the assumptions in the general plan, including the reduction from the incentive overlays. As far as co-housing, I could see a place for it, but one of the biggest needs that we have is housing for families. It's huge. So much of our new housing is basically geared towards young professionals who don't have families, who don't have kids. And it's unfortunate that the regional housing needs allocation does not really address the types of units other than affordability, because even having been involved with different housing nonprofits on specific projects and so forth, it's the family housing where you're always hurting. Everybody wants to build senior housing for a couple of seniors or one senior or young professionals, but if we're really looking at our housing need, we really, really need to look for family housing. And then I noticed there was the one PowerPoint slide where you were asking for numbers of units to be removed. I know it's difficult to provide information on income of units, of occupants of units to be removed, but could we at least get the rental rates so we'll know if units to be removed are affordable or if they are going to be a lot more costly? And also the configuration. For example, are they removing a bunch of studio units or are they removing 3-bedroom family units? Because that makes a huge difference. I keep thinking back, how many years ago? It's probably 8-10 years ago, watching a planning commission hearing, and there were the people on Maple Street saying, where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? And there wasn't any place for them. And I look at the apartments near me on Royal Palm. They're 2-bedroom apartments, and there are a lot of families there. But 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and there are a lot of families because that's the most they can afford. So I would like us to look at that. Have we looked at housing linkage fees for commercial development? It's my understanding that part of our regional housing needs assessment, in fact, a good chunk of those units were assigned based on job generation. And so I know there are communities, particularly in the Bay Area, that have housing linkage fees for commercial development based on the number of employees to be generated and the income levels anticipated for those employees. And that's something we might want to look at as well. I know people are worried about discouraging commercial, but one of the reasons we have such a giant number is because of all our job generation. And then, let me look here. And as we move forward, I think we might want to start thinking outside the box, talking to some of the major land developers, where I have always thought that when I was 25, my dream housing unit would have been at South Coast Plaza. Probably even when I was 30, my dream housing unit would have been at South Coast Plaza. If I could have lived at South Coast Plaza, I don't think I would have ever left. And so there are opportunities that are maybe a little different, and I don't know whether that would fit anyone's vision over there. And obviously, if the property owner doesn't have any interest, then it's not realistic. I also think I would like to see the data on the number of units that we have provided in the last housing element cycle, because a good chunk of the big jump where we went from like 4,000 units to 11,700 was assigned on the basis, and this was the quote, Riverside Amendment, where basically they took the housing backlog and reassigned it. And we're basically being asked to make up the backlog for, Temecula, well, are they even in our region? Yeah, they are. Moreno Valley, for, Malibu, for Bradbury, but we've already been making up the backlog. So I would like us to see those numbers, because if we do mount a challenge, I think that's a big, big point in our favor, that we're making up everybody else's backlog already, so don't dump more on us. And then as far as transit areas, for all this, are they using the standard, whether it's the ADUs or whatever, are they pretty much sticking with the bus line that has 15-minute headways or less for 1 hour of the day? Oh, that means that's my house. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. This is a nice change of pace from the last couple days.
Yes.
And apologies to Keith and Josh for not being able to meet with you yesterday. I was hoping to get that in before this meeting, but been a little busy. Anyway, I think that cooperative co-living is a really creative solution. You might call living on an aircraft carrier for 3 years co-living, but there were fewer pool tables.
That's true.
Anyway, no, I think that's going to be, if I have to summarize everything I want to say right now, it would be that we should be as creative as possible in addressing some of, first of all, our absolutely insane RHNA numbers, but just in general in terms of providing housing moving forward. I love the idea. I have lived in a variety of situations throughout my life, and there would have been a period of time when that was perfect. So I'd love to see us look into a co-living code ordinance as referenced during the presentation. And just generally, Mr. Curtis, keeping our eyes open for as many creative housing options as possible. Ms. Nolf mentioned in particular the idea of senior living combined with other folks. I've seen this kind of a model where we try to create opportunities for seniors and those just coming into the, just moving out of their houses basically to live together in some format. So I think that's kind of interesting. So speaking of seniors, the senior housing spectrum is pretty broad, right? All the way from skilled nursing to independent living and sort of everything in between. And I'm wondering to what extent we can count senior living specifically towards either any affordable housing or as independent units. So if they're truly independent, a 55 plus Aslan type situation, versus as you move along the spectrum and sort of increase the supportive functions, how does that work in the context of these numbers?
Councilmember Marr, it basically transitions from what's counted as a housing unit under the RHNA to what is not counted as a housing unit under the RHNA. And there's a spectrum of, as you described there, and exactly where that changes. More likely than not has to do with when the units stop having a kitchen and things like that associated with them. But we can do a little more research on that to understand if there's been any changes and exactly how HCD would treat those.
Yeah, I'd like to understand that a little bit better so that we can be clear when we're talking about accommodating sort of the full spectrum of society, that we're not just talking about one specific kind of senior living, that we're potentially identifying options in between. Short-term rentals, thank you, Mayor Foley. This is something I brought up a couple of times. I think we have an opportunity to regulate and professionalize the way we do short-term rentals in this city. There's been a number of excellent case studies of other cities who have, brought in a third party, does an inspection, there's an annual fee for doing that inspection, and it means the good short-term rentals get better and held to a standard, and the bad short-term rentals go away because they can't be held to the standard. So I'd like to see us work on that, potentially in the context of this discussion. I do love the idea of expediting some kind of a canned ADU. If you follow exactly what we do, then either that's a permitting fee waive or that's just an expedited process, but there's got to be a way that we can incentivize sort of the ADU in a box concept. Anyone who knows me knows that I've been supportive of inclusionary housing for a long time. In terms of both the inclusionary housing ordinance and any changes around density bonus specific to Costa Mesa, yes, absolutely, I'd love to see this done as soon as possible. I will leave it to you, though, Mr. Curtis, to determine exactly where the cutoffs are, because I know that we need to not be so aggressive such that no one ever builds anything because they don't want to conform to our inclusionary housing law, but also not so lenient that everyone can just do it super easily. And I know there's a lot of math that goes into trying to make sure that we're at that intersection of property values and being able to actually make inclusionary work. So I look forward to you bringing that back with some more detail that we can weigh in on. Mobile homes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that we need to be very careful that we're not zoning ourselves out of having existing housing for what amounts to a lot of seniors, a lot of folks who are in affordable housing. And so to the extent that we can protect those lots and that development in particular, we should be trying to do that. As we hire a housing element consultant, I'm going to channel my inner Councilmember Reynolds right now and ask that we prioritize community engagement to the greatest extent possible, all around the city, every district, and make sure that this is a process that the community feels they have access to. To the point about vision, I think that the housing element process is potentially the opportunity to do that, and I'd like to focus in particular on Harbor Boulevard, Newport Boulevard, and north of the 405, as we look to what the future of both meeting our RHNA numbers are, but just in general what the next 10 years look like, especially if we're looking at upzoning to meet those RHNA numbers. And then speaking of RHNA, I would support appealing at this point. My understanding is that that doesn't cost us anything, but it does give us the opportunity to point out the, as Councilmember Guinness mentioned, the sort of like ridiculous standard for high quality transit is one bus that passes every once in a while that OCTA could frankly remove at any time. And that is part of what contributed to us having such a high number, is this sort of, I'll say ridiculous emphasis on transit, which really isn't high quality at all. And I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Mansour.
Mr. Curtis, on your last slide, you had questions about, or a comment about appealing or potentially appealing the RHNA numbers. So I have a couple questions about that, if you can clarify. So I think this has come up before. Would we be appealing on our own, joining with other cities, and are we appealing the whole process? In other words, isn't it the same formula that's applied equally to everyone? Because what I'm understanding is that may not be the case. Has it been applied differently to us compared to other cities? Councilmember Guinness mentioned Temecula and other cities, and we're making up the brunt of this. How do we, is that accurate, and how do we determine that? I mean, we all want to, do our fair share, but it's got to be applied, fairly. And so I guess it's kind of a couple different questions. Would the appeal be by us individually, or would we be joining with other cities? And this is specific to other cities. Are we being asked to make up numbers that they're falling short on?
Councilmember Mansour, the appeal could take both of the approaches you talked about. The city could appeal our specific RHNA allocation, but it's very limited as to what you're allowed to appeal. There's the AB 52 factors that Minu talked about early in the presentation, and has to show that those weren't applied properly. The city, this is the first time it's been allowed, but cities can appeal other cities' numbers. So I know in talking to other cities in Orange County, there's a couple of cities that folks felt their RHNAs weren't appropriate, and that they've been trying to talk about, getting together and appealing on those. So it could be either of those. And similarly, we could appeal ours and someone else could appeal ours. I would hope that they would appeal ours because they want to take some, but so those are the options that it could take, and we could do both of those things. We could appeal ours and someone else's. As far as the methodology, I guess the technical answer is the methodology was applied equally to everyone. The problem is the way the methodology was set up, everyone gets hit differently at different levels. So to Councilmember Guinness's point, I think it's a fair point. We had a very low, almost non-existent RHNA in the current cycle. We've built several thousand units in that period of time. Kind of water over the bridge that we're not going to get credit for, whereas other cities, and I don't know enough to speak about who the bad actors are, but there's certainly bad actor cities that haven't provided enough housing. And that is all kind of lumped into a big pool of need that gets distributed to everyone through the methodology.
Okay. Well, that being said, it does sound like the process was a bit skewed, to be nice, put it nicely. So I would be supportive of an appeal in whatever ways possible, multiple ways. I just don't think we should be hit with the full burden. We've already gone above and beyond, and that's why we had such low numbers before. and then all of a sudden get hit with a large amount, something's out of whack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, staff and everyone that came today for our study session. I'll begin first and foremost with the presentation by Keith and Josh. I think it's worth considering looking at co-living. I know their ideal like test location would be in my district, and I think as D4 representative, I'd be okay with that being done there. Could be the potential for really big creative use for our big box stores going out of business, just Kmart and other sorts of that nature. In terms of the inclusionary housing ordinance, I'm all in favor of it. I, too, along with Councilmember Marr, am very supportive of this measure since my time on council and much before that. I support adding a density bonus to incentivize those who want to go beyond the inclusionary housing ordinance to get more density that way. And overall, I think any chance we have to incentivize density, we should be taking that chance, given the high number of RHNA we have. You asked for a vision of Costa Mesa. I'll give you mine really briefly. North of the 405 is a treasure trove. We don't have a lot of residents there who will be impacted by new housing options there. So I think if anything we can fit in there, we should. In terms of corridors with mixed use, I really view Harbor, Newport Boulevard, 19th Street, and Placentia as treasure troves where we can really be upzoning there, having mixed use with perhaps the first floor being businesses, top floor being housing. That way we can actually get to an actual walkable, bikeable Costa Mesa. Because that way we have places to walk to and actually bike to that aren't across town. And one more thing as well, given the recency of the coronavirus fear, I also want to reiterate the importance of having housing in FDC if we're allowed to as a state. That is an area that could really benefit from having housing. We can make it affordable because it's owned by the state. And it could be something that we do that's not going to impact as many people because, again, it's around a golf course. So, again, being proactive there I think is really critical. Finally, I do have a brief point to make. Earlier you mentioned that a lot of the housing we're being mentioned now is really for people who are my age, that 24 to 35-year-old bracket. Well, I want to remind people in Costa Mesa that 58% of our population is renters, and about a quarter is between 24 and 35. This is a very young, vibrant city, and we have a lot of jobs in the area because of it. A lot of like entrepreneurs come to Costa Mesa, want to live here. We should really be incentivizing that population because they chose to come here for a reason. So I just want to make sure we have housing for everyone. And I think that's really all I have to add. Once again, staff, thank you for this presentation. And looking forward to anything else you may add. And finally, I just want to reiterate the last point. We should have templates for the ADUs, make it streamlined, easy to accessible for people to do one. And let's find a way to perhaps bring people out of the shadows. I mentioned earlier today to Mr. Curtis in our meeting today earlier, there are a lot of people that are living in, I guess it's JADU kind of livings where there may be a garage conversion that was not allowed by the city and they did it illegally. We need to find a way to bring them out of the shadows and bring them to the forefront to ensure their safety and make sure they're being counted for the RHNA numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stevens.
So I'm sorry I was late. I was in downtown LA all day, which is probably good. I'm going to incorporate that into some of my comments about housing in Costa Mesa, the concept of the burden of commuting. So I want to start by kind of seeing what I think are just big picture goals that we can have. And one of them is to keep our families in Costa Mesa together. And what I mean by that is we have a community where at least the objective of a lot of our citizens is to graduate from the local schools and then come back here and live the rest of their lives. And that's not true in a lot of communities. Where I grew up, I couldn't wait to leave, and I never came back. And there are more people that graduated from my high school, San Gabriel High School, who currently live in Costa Mesa than that live in San Gabriel. And so we're a destination place, and then when people come here, they want to stay. And when I say keep families together, I want to be specific about that. I mean, keep families together such that they're living near each other, but not necessarily with each other. And I think I can get an amen from Katrina Foley on that one. And And so, while sometimes you do have a multi-generational household, it would be wonderful if we could avoid that to the extent necessary. And therefore, I'm supportive of the co-living idea. And somebody said at a recent thing I went to, I can't remember, that this whole idea of housing is fairly new, that it used to be not too long ago, I want to say they said in 1980 or something like that, that most communities had housing for people at different income levels. So every income level had housing. And I think that's what we should strive for. So there's a place to live when you're 20 years old or whatever. And then there's also a place to live, as Councilmember Guinness said, when you have a family and you want a little bit more space. And then there's also a place to live when you become elderly and you can no longer afford or maintain that type of intense real estate. The other thing, getting to my experience with, so I think we should strive for that. And I've got some suggestions about how we might tackle that in a second. The other big, so keep families together. That's my first thing. The other is provide a place where the people who work in our city can live in our city to the extent possible. So my experience today of traveling 2 hours to downtown Los Angeles and traveling 2 hours late and thinking how everybody was missing me here at City Hall, and I was so stressed out that I was stuck in traffic, and I knew you would be all so disappointed that I wasn't here. And that created a lot of stress. And as we create an environment where people can live and work near each other, it improves their quality of life, reduces their stress. So to the extent that we can do that, I think that that's a big picture goal. So how could we go about doing that? There's a reference in this staff report to hiring a consultant, an RFP going out. I think we should focus on some of these issues that I'm talking about. So I'd like to see us, when we're doing this housing element, really drill down and do some good analysis on our demographic analytics. So, Council Member Guinness made an assertion, and I have no reason to disbelieve it, that our main concern is that we need housing for our families, okay? And she, for all I know, she has data to support that. I'm not disputing that. But what I'm saying is, it would be great as a decision maker here to have some real statistical analytic data. So what is our demographic what are our demographic trends? We're seeing all this, we're reading articles about it, council members are mentioning these things, but do we really know the hard data? Have we really studied it? What is Costa Mesa's demographic going to look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And then how are we going to plan for that? And the kind of the gut feel of the council is probably not good enough, because we're entrusted to make decisions to accomplish these goals for people that are going to be living in our town for 30 years from now. And so we better get it right. The other thing along the lines of my second issue is the people who live in our city, where do they work? The people that work in our city, where do they live? To do some analysis of that, some studying of that. And so with the idea that we want that number over time to be reduced, so people are living closer to where they work. And how can we facilitate that? And then in terms of visioning, which I thought was a good idea, but I see that as very literal. We're talking about visioning above the 405. Councilmember Chavez mentioned that. We talk about, how many units, okay? What does that look like? When I remember when I was in a meeting of CM4RG during the Measure Y election period, And Mr. Humphrey, who spoke about, he always gives us great ideas, and he and another resident created a mock-up almost, of what it would look like on Harbor Boulevard if these different places were hotels, or if there was a big housing unit. It's like, so what does it look like? So what is, I don't know. It's so abstract to me what 11,500 units looks like. I'm sorry, I can't understand it. I don't understand it. And I will never understand it until there's some, actual mock-ups or some graphics or something of that nature that explains it to me. And then we could roll that out to the community and say, what does this look like? Oh, I want it here, I want it there. Something very dynamic and fun, and with and some type of we talk about connection and what do you call it, engagement, is something other than us sitting up here on this high platform and having people be able to say their 2 minutes, but something where you could say, okay, we'll do that. What if we did that? And when we sit among the people and we really kind of get into what, and have it be a really fun, interesting event where we would get, not, with all due respect, I mean, it's great that you guys are here, but I'm talking about if we get 100 times more people, where you can't even fill, it's at some arena or something like that in town. And people are just excited about it, and they're looking at it, and it's real engagement. I haven't seen that, but I think we need to do something really entertaining and fun if we're going to get people to come to that and promote it. Anyway, so with that, that's all I have to say, and I'm going to rest up for the closed session.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Okay. I'm tempted to just start every time I have the mic just shouting bikes. But this is a housing forum, right? So I was trying to think of, do I disagree with anything I've heard so far? And I can't think of anything. I don't want to be too repetitive, so I'll go quickly on the things we've already heard. But I really do appreciate Mayor Pro Tem kind of bringing this up to what are the high-level values? And then, I think starting with that and how does that guide this vision, which I think is really important. I've been sitting here thinking the same thing you mentioned at the end, is I wish I was here, drawing on papers on the board, playing with blocks, or doing something a little bit more physical as we actually talk about what these different strategies would look like. On the values piece, things I think I'd like to see sort of the impacts on some, I guess, broader urban planning metrics. This is not my field, of course, of some of these different strategies is, how do upzoning in certain areas affect things like our people to parks ratio, right? I think it was slide 13, I don't know, that showed, a lot of upzoning opportunity on the west side. That's also our poorest park area, right? And so that really messes up an area that's already sort of suffering in terms of park access. I think we need to be really considerate about those impacts. It'd be neat to have some other goals, in addition to keep families together. I think I'm on the good side of that. I literally live adjacent to my parents, but not with them. It's great. My mom brought me lunch today, which was really nice. Things like I've heard other goals, like everybody should live within a 10-minute walk to a park. I think those are really nice design strategies. I would like everybody should live within a 10-minute walk to a coffee shop. Things like that I think would come out in these, my life would be set with that. I think some things like that would come out with this good community engagement too, right? What do people want to have access to in Costa Mesa? So I love of course, the engagement. When you said series of workshops, I got really excited. I think workshops that we host, workshops that we facilitate with builders like these ADU builders, right, who can show us different ideas of what is becoming popular in the marketplace. I think also because the community input and engagement is going to be so important in this process, I think anytime we have a public event, it'd be great to have a booth where we have some of these ideas and are just constantly taking input on everything from, values of our community and broader vision and goals to, specific things they'd like to see on their street. Okay, that was the big picture stuff. Be as creative as possible. Councilmember Mars said that. I think that makes sense. We really got to be out of the box. I'm really, I think, open to hearing all strategies. There's nothing that I would say, well, I'm not going to just be, I'm open to all strategies. I think we need to be really creative. And I think we should also really look to the market for strategies as well, both the buyer market and the builder market. Somewhere in our staff report, we talk about, the housing element requires that we sort of allow for building, but we know that doesn't necessarily make building happen. And I think we need building to happen to solve the housing crisis. So I'd be interested in hearing from builders of all levels, not just the Sakiokas and the Rose Equities. These are the home builders, right? The medium development size builders. What do they see market demand for? Is it co-living? Is it 80 units per acre? And where? And then what are the barriers that have prevented that building? I think we hear a lot of things. I know our parking requirements come up as one of the barriers. So I'd be really interested in hearing from them, what barriers do we need to overcome to actually make housing building happen? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to try to run down the list so you see what I'm supportive. So completely support the inclusionary ordinance. I understand that that's working well in other Orange County cities. Love the creative co-living idea and support a code ordinance around that. I did have a chance to meet with our co-living presenters today and shared that if I think a co-living situation on sort of a commercial corridor, I'd love to see some street-facing kind of commercial element of that to have that community also interact with the broader public as well. ADUs, I think, are going to be a really important strategy that not only provide a different type of unit, but also empower homeowners to bring in some additional income. I like the idea of different strategies on incentives for to kind of lock in a low-income ADU, for example. We know we have a lot of, again, seniors living alone or students who are currently homeless, where, I could see putting an ADU in my house, for example. I've mentioned this before, an ADU in my yard, for example, lock that in at a really low rate to meet one of those affordable levels. Hopefully that would work for RHNA as well. I'd love to see a workshop or open house where we invite some of these builders that you guys are talking to already to engage the community in that process and see let homeowners know and property owners know what may be available and get their input on that. I've seen that happen in some other cities already. And I love the idea of pre-approved plans or templates to streamline that process. We've talked about mixed use a bit. I've in past years have lived on I think it was a 4th floor of a mixed use commercial building. It was wonderful on a commercial corridor. I think there's a real opportunity for that on some of the corridors we've heard mentioned today, Harbor, Newport. What was the other one Councilmember Marr mentioned? Harbor, Newport, Placentia, 19th. There was one more, but same ones. Commercial corridors, north of the 405, yeah, where we already see some of that. This is, okay, so we mentioned this a little bit, this no net loss of housing. I think there's a rule around no net loss of affordable housing. I think Ms. Nolf mentioned that. And I think Councilmember Guinness mentioned a little bit of this too. I'm very concerned about displacement of current residents. So we may have a great project that has a lot of affordable units come in. If it's displacing existing affordable units, we can say, well, there's no net loss of affordable, but it might still be we're still pushing a family that's been here out, even if we're replacing it with a new unit. There's no guarantee that that family can stay there. So I'd be curious to learn a few more strategies, what existing protection there is against that. And I would like us to be really careful about that, about displacing families that are here now. The housing transit nexus, I don't think, especially when we're talking about the numbers that we're talking about now on housing, we can't not talk about transportation, active transportation. I do agree that the whatever guidelines that were used in the RHNA process are ridiculous in saying that we are a high quality transit area. I would like to see us, through our housing conversation or in tandem with that, reach out to the different transit agencies and talk about how do we really become a high quality transit area. Not just say that we're not now, say that if we're going to make housing work in this area, we need to have better transit. I don't think this has been mentioned yet. You mentioned, I think, in the first slide, the ratio of rental units to owner-occupied units. Strategies to support more home ownership at all levels, too, would be something that I'd like to see. That's it.
Councilmember Moore, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Thank you. Yeah, so I can't take any credit for this. This was Mr. Curtis talking to me earlier today, but I noticed it on the handwritten page 38, meeting California's housing needs, best practices for inclusionary housing. The top of the page in the blue box talks about for rental units, 55 years is a common affordability term required by many affordable housing funding programs in California. An inclusionary ordinance should require at least as long a period, although it's not uncommon for jurisdictions to require longer periods, or even to mandate that inclusionary rental units be deed restricted in perpetuity, as West Hollywood does. So that was just an interesting thing that I hadn't really thought about until today in terms of how long they remain deed restricted as we talk about affordable housing. And so as we look at levers and all of the math that you're going to be doing, I'd be very interested to understand extending that period for affordable housing deed restrictions much longer than required. Thank you.
Councilmember Chavez.
I can't believe I actually forgot some points to make from my earlier comments, but I guess those hype about housing conversation that kind of got a bit carried away. I want to reiterate Councilmember Reynolds' points of not displacing any residents. That is one of the biggest traumas we have in my district. I cannot tell you the fear I faced growing up seeing neighbors and friends I knew be replaced, see their apartments replaced by new housing that wasn't affordable to us. And that's something that we have to be very conscious that the city did. And to not repeat again, it does affect lives, really. And lastly, and secondly, I really want to comment on senior housing. It's a really big thing that we focus on our senior residents in Costa Mesa. Any opportunity we have to really find any spaces to allow senior housing, we should be looking into because they are part of our community, same as everyone else. And lastly, I kind of want to bring up the boogeyman a little bit. We did not really talk much about Measure Y tonight, and that really is a boogeyman in the room. One of the things I always think about is when I'm asking for something to be built in Costa Mesa, who is going to be building it? It's going to be a developer, someone has a vision for what can happen in Costa Mesa. We have to make sure what we're doing, we have to find a way to work around Measure Y in some capacity. Maybe it'll be through a future ballot initiative, maybe it'll be through clarifying language from our city staff. Maybe affordable housing is something that can circumvent it, but we really can't move forward as Costa Mesa with this in play. So if there's anything we can do to maybe have a study on how to work around Measure Y or make it work with our housing element, that'd be really important for us to do because I would hate to see us not grow into what we could become because of Measure Y. And that's kind of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Guinness.
And my thing doesn't seem to be working but anyway, I'll work that out with staff later. A couple things. For short-term rentals, I'd like to see us look at that beyond just the ADUs, because to the extent that somebody is renting just a room occasionally and it helps them stay in their home, that's a good idea. But to the extent that an entire dwelling unit has become essentially a hotel, we're losing our housing stock, and it's also disruptive to the neighborhoods. We also have several hundred homes in sober living. I know we're limited on how we may regulate those, but we may wish to see what we can do to revisit that so that we could free up some of those units for just general use. We have sites that are underbuilt at less than they could potentially have on the zoning and the general plan. And can we look at transfer of development rights where maybe there's no potential that they're going to be redeveloping in the near future, but perchance they could transfer their rights onto a nearby site? And I know right now that the rules are very, very strict on that, but we might want to re-examine those to see the extent to which we can do it without creating significant impacts on the area receiving the additional units, and look at how that would interact with Measure Y. And the housing estimate, now our regional housing needs assessment is supposed to show what our capacity will be. And for accessory dwelling units, I understand why we have to take a conservative approach, because if you really haven't had many in the past, you can't say we're going to have 2,000 accessory dwelling units. The HCD is not going to buy it. But we do have to show, but if our zoning capacity is there, I'm trying to understand what the point is on taking a conservative estimate, because if the zoning capacity is there, that's what they require. So why on earth would we want to backpedal and say, well, the zoning capacity is there, but we need to give you another couple thousand units besides that? That just seems like we're hurting ourselves. And it's not even that we don't want to provide housing, it's that we don't want to set ourselves up for the penalties that could incur if we have difficulty providing it. So I can't imagine why on earth we would want to do that. And going back to the regional housing needs assessment, for those who weren't involved in the process, there's two components of the housing need. There's the housing need for the future, for the 7-year period, and then there's the housing need, the backlog for the unmet need from the past. And then within that, a portion is assigned on a fair share basis. Just, every city gets some, and it's prorated based on the size of the city and so forth. But then a big chunk of that got assigned on the basis of job generation and the so-called high-quality transit areas, or HQTAs. Now, I would argue that we have LQTAs, which are low-quality transit areas. But, so a chunk got added that way. And then at the last minute, Riverside proposed an amendment where you would take the backlog and largely assign it on the basis of the HQTAs and the job generation. So basically, even if you had been providing housing in the past, you got a share of the housing that somebody else hadn't provided in the past. And so not only did I see that as unfair because of what we have provided, but also the other aspect of that is there are some questions about procedurally, because it was a last-minute suggestion, a last-minute amendment. It was not properly vetted by SCAG staff. In fact, SCAG staff recommended against that amendment. And so I would say that's another reason that we should challenge that. And as a matter of fact, I know a number of cities in Orange County are challenging their allocation on the basis of that last-minute change. But that doesn't change the fact that we do need to find more places for housing, and we need to get creative. And our biggest challenge, I believe, and what we really need to make our focus is providing housing for people who work here. And so we probably should be looking at the type of jobs we have. For example, we have a lot of retail. They don't pay all that well. We have a lot of healthcare workers. That doesn't pay all that well. And I don't know about the need for family citywide, like on the demographics, but I just know that what I see are a lot of families being priced out, and a lot of the product that we're producing is not family housing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for bringing up the need for an assessment. I had written that down as well, because I do think we need to kind of know what it is we need. What I'd like to request is 3 things. One, I'd like staff to tell us what else you need from us here tonight. 2, I'd like to request that we plan for some kind of a community housing town hall sometime in August. And that would be of the type of town hall, much like this new process that we've begun, where we have stations and the poster boards up and people can give input, not just come up to the podium and talk at us. And then also, I would like to get some feedback regarding, I know that we have requested, maybe this is Mr. Preciosi, we have requested an analysis of Measure Y, sorry, Preciosi, okay. Direct my comments to the right. We've requested an analysis of Measure Y specifically as it relates to affordable housing. And because of the language in Measure Y that exempts it if it is building affordable housing. So to the extent, have we done that analysis?
My office is working on it in conjunction with planning.
Okay, we're working on it. We don't know yet. Okay. Do we know when we will get that analysis?
We expect to have it shortly, Your Honor.
Okay. Within the month? Hopefully?
Within next month, certainly.
Okay, all right. I know everyone's a little busy right now, so I get it. You get a pass this month. And, okay, so those are my 3 requests. I wanted to get the analysis on Measure Y as it relates to affordability and how that language in Measure Y is applied. Also, can we do a town hall in August? Get some community input. 3rd, and I guess that would depend on if we have our housing element consultant on board yet. And I guess my feedback on that is, I think we should do something maybe a little different than what we would normally see from these housing element consultants. They all kind of have a formula. And so it would be nice if we had something that was a little broader and more interactive. I'm pretty sure everybody up here would agree with that, right? Yes. Okay. And then what else do you need from us?
Madam Mayor, so other than the 3 things that we mentioned, and we did receive input from a number of the council members on those, we will be moving forward, as I indicated, with an RFP for a housing element consultant. We have money budgeted in the coming budget for that process. We also were awarded an SB2 grant that can partially go towards that. So at the present time, other than the continued support and other ideas that anyone might think of over the coming days and months, that's really all we're looking for at this point, as well as I didn't count because I was trying to take notes, but I think we had enough to indicate that I think the majority of council members indicated some desire to move forward with an appeal. It is, as I indicated,
Well, we can't vote on that right now.
I know, but
and so,
staff will...
So you'd have to bring that forward to a publicly noticed meeting, I guess. Is that a public hearing item or is that closed session?
It's really just, we'd just be looking for direction for staff to move forward with an appeal. So we'll work on getting that to the city council.
Okay.
And the same with the inclusionary housing.
Oh, okay, very good. Councilmember McGinnis, did you have something else?
I strongly agree with the idea of having a workshop, but I'm a little concerned about doing it when a lot of people might be gone on vacation. And so maybe we might want to consider during the school year, although then mom and dad get busy with kids stuff too.
I think we're going to have many, many workshops. I just want to get the conversation going. And, we're trying to reach a whole variety of people, not just people who have kids in school. Okay. Of course. I think that was a given. Okay. We will conclude for this evening and adjourn to closed session. But do we need to read the title for the closed session item? Are we good? Yes. Okay.
Closed session, anticipated litigation, 1 case, City of Costa Mesa versus United States of America, et al., U.S. District Court, case number 20-CV-00368-JLS-JDE.
Okay, at this time, I'll open it up for public comment related to the closed session item. Is there anyone wishing to speak to that item? Seeing no one, I'll close public comment and we will adjourn to close. Oh, did you want to speak to it? Sorry, I didn't see you get up.
I had to make it through sit through the dense discussion of housing. I have a couple of things. First of all, I'm obviously very concerned about what's going on in the hearing. This is a disease that would probably kill me and my husband. So I'm of an age, so it's disturbing. On the bright side, it would solve your housing problem for seniors. But
oh, that's not a solution.
It's gallows humor.
For sure.
But in addition to that, if you're going to be in closed session, I really want to know what you're going to be doing for the community, because this goes beyond a housing situation on top of that hill, and I'm assuming that there's some kind of a plan that has been put in place in the past for an epidemic. And if there's not one, then you really need to start thinking of one. Because I really don't believe that the federal government will be able to provide us with resources, but as citizens, we will look to the city, and we will need help from the city. And, that includes, how are you going to protect our public safety personnel? What will they be doing in terms of coming out to housing? How will you educate us to prepare for voluntary quarantine? How will you be able to check on us? Many people have pets, have house pets. If we are hospitalized in serious condition, will the city be able to provide some kind of resources to come to our homes and pick up our pets and take care of them? And do it in such a way that whoever comes will be protected. Once again, just education with the community. We have problems with testing equipment. Testing, I know right now they don't have anything that's particularly reliable. Hopefully they will. Will that testing equipment be made available so that somebody can come to our homes and test us for the disease? There's so much that's unknown with how long you stay in quarantine. I assumed it was 2 weeks, but it looks like it's more like 3 and 4. That people who have the disease and theoretically get better actually continue to shed the virus. So you really don't even know how long the period of safety is after you are supposedly free of the disease. And these are things I really think the city, that the council needs to be serious about. If we have these people moving in within our confines, these problems will probably come up sooner than later.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I would encourage you to, those are exactly the same concerns that we have. And if you go to the city's website, I encourage anyone to do this. There's a page now designated to coronavirus and an update every day on what's happening. There's also all of the documents that were filed with the court, and included with that is a declaration from our city manager that essentially goes through and describes all of the protocols and procedures and planning that should happen. And also many things that, yes, would address all these things. And those questions that you just asked, I'm going to make sure that we include those in the questions about the pets. I think that's a very good question. The court directed our questions to be answered by the government. So we'll add those 3 questions to the list of questions. So thank you for bringing that up.
I think the federal government will not be protecting us. It really has to go to the city. And I really would like to do it. And just one more thing. I'd like to give Sandy my condolences for her loss.
For her loss? Oh, I'm sorry. You lost your dog? Oh, sorry. We didn't know. Sorry, thank you. Okay, sir, yes.
Thank you, Council, Mayor. I just I didn't realize that Measure Y was in relation to the Fairview issue. Oh, it's not okay. I'm sorry about that. Thank you so much, Mayor. Actually, the questions that I had, you answered. You said you were going to post it. I just wanted to know if that there was any information that the public could know. I mean, as you mentioned, it's going to be listed on the website and all the court documents. Do we know what time frame? I know we're waiting till next Monday for a decision as far as I mean, again, it's really hard to get details because not a lot of people have any idea what's going on. As a matter of fact, while this was in session, San Francisco went into emergency, state of emergency. So I just wanted to kind of know, I'm so sorry I came late. What time does this start so I can come on time next time? I was told it started at 6.
Well, we have different meetings, sir. We have, so the study session started at 5.
I see.
And then we had a closed session that was scheduled to start at 6:30 or after the study session, whichever was later.
So closed, is that for you guys only, or is that for the
Correct.
public?
And we do, this is the closed session announcement, and then we take public comment, and then we go into closed session.
Okay,
So let me answer all your, did you have any other
Yeah,
comment?
I just, we're all, obviously all very concerned, and I just kind of was coming here to see if I can get any type of information, and I was shocked that we're talking about housing, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're talking about housing because that was agendized long before we had a coronavirus crisis. So I would encourage people to go to the city's website. On the landing page, there is a very specific tab that says coronavirus, and you can click on that tab, and on that page is every single court filing that was filed both by the city as well as the federal government, the state government, and any of our community partners, legislative partners, such as the county, Newport Beach, filed an amicus brief, as well as Ocean View School District. So that's all on our city website, as well as all of the press releases regarding what we're doing, as well as the press conference. And then the next hearing is on Monday at 2 p.m. And so unless we hear something before then that changes, we won't know anything until after Monday at 2 p.m. And then we will immediately send out an announcement through our email system, which I encourage you to get logged into so you can get city updates. It's right on that homepage. And then we will let people know what happened. And so that's pretty much all we can tell you at this time. Okay? Yeah, no, thank you, Councilmember Reynolds. The Monday hearing, it's not a hearing at City Hall. This is a federal court hearing in Judge Statton's courtroom. Okay? All right, thank you so much, everyone.